Hello, and welcome to this episode of Skill Up Like a Superhero, the podcast that answers your questions regarding careers and certifications in tech. I am your host, Dwayne, aka Captain Hyperscaler, certified in Microsoft, ISC2, Osaka, and trainer in all of those as well, with years of industry experience and in multiple different roles. And today we're going to be talking to somebody that's been that's somebody that I've followed for a long time and is really got a lot of great content around preparing for certification exams, and that's really going to be kind of the focus of our topic today. So let's meet today's guest. Welcome to Ben Malisow, sorry, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Dwayne. I'm really glad to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, why don't you give everybody a quick 50,000 foot view of who Ben is and what Ben does.
The problem with that is usually we define ourselves by what we do, and I not only can I not keep a job, I can't keep a career field. So right out of high school, I went into the military. Out of the military, I became a journalist. From there, I went into federal IT contracting over in the DC area. And that's where I really launched into InfoSec, which I've been doing now for about 25 years. It's where I got my first certification, the CISSP. And from there, I've also been a middle school, junior high, and high school teacher, community college instructor, university professor. I was an ISC squared official instructor for 6 years. Now I have my own company where I do certification training, largely in the InfoSec space. And we've got an app out with practice questions. And in my spare time, I do a lot of laundry and cooking for my girlfriend. So there you go.
There you go. Well, thank you, Pat. I appreciate it. I'm out of Michigan, but I grew up in actually the Baltimore, DC area, so I know that area very well.
Well, I grew up in Wisconsin, so I'm closer to the Michigan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I had another guy that I worked with in my last company that he grew up in Michigan and he was in Maryland at the time, and so we always talked about, he always would send stuff about University of Michigan and the Detroit Tigers and things like that, and he sent me a picture when him and his kid went to the Baltimore Orioles game when the Tigers were in town. So those are always fun things. Right. But enough about our personal lives. Let's talk about our professional lives, and really what we try and bring to our listeners is how certifications help with careers and things like that. One of the things that we were talking about before we went on camera was one of the, I've browsed and used some of your books around certification prep in the past, and one that you really had that was very interesting to me at the time, because I was really kind of starting into kind of InfoSec certifications, was you had an entire kind of overview of different exams, not just the ISC2, but I think Osaka was in there. I can't remember if any, what the other ones were at the time, but you really had a very structured approach to approaching certifications and exams, and I think that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you to be on this podcast. I'd really like for you to kind of, not giving away anything that people would pay for in your classes, but why don't you share some of those thoughts, and like you said, you've done a whole lot of different things and you've supported a lot of people in getting certified. What are your thoughts, and kind of giving some of those tidbits of knowledge that you can share?
I love that, and I love that you honed in on the fact that it was a structured approach and an overview of multiple different certs. That book in particular is in its second edition. That's How to Pass Your InfoSec Exam, still available on Amazon and a bunch of other places. That I'm going to take some of the magic out of this for you, and I apologize. It's there's a prosaic reason that book exists. I wrote that book while I was an ISC squared instructor, and while I was under contract with them through their Wiley Cybex arrangement to do some of their official courseware and content, including the official CCSP study guide and practice test books. So I wasn't allowed to write my own book. But the experience that I got writing for ISC Squared and writing for Wiley and some of the other big houses really turned me off to how they try to convey the information for certification candidates, because their approach is you must include everything. Everything must have equal and adequate coverage. And in terms of what we say, everything on the exam outline for any particular cert. And I'm sort of the anti-teacher. I have an approach and a concept that a lot of professional educators hate. I want to teach the test, and that's a dirty phrase in the academic world. My feeling is, whether you're in 6th grade, whether you're an InfoSec practitioner and you want to get a certification, the test is a standard. It is a way to determine whether or not you're qualified to move on to the next thing. So I believe that in order to give everyone a fair chance at doing so, you have to teach that material. You have to convey to them the stuff that's important to them. Now, it's also great if along the way they learn the place of American history and world history. It's great if they learn all the background of all InfoSec stuff, starting from, how to read binary code and going all the way up through the Biba and Bell LaPadula nonsense. Okay, that's all well and good, but what is going to help them pass the exam? So what I did was, when I wrote that book, the How to Pass Your InfoSec Exam, that was sort of my answer to, yes, here's the official content over here, which has everything all equal and equivalent. Now, this is my shortcut to teaching the test. This is the stuff you're going to need to know. And as you said, it covers a lot of different certs. There's like everything from CISSP to CISM to whatever else certs I have at the time. And what I included in there, in very simple, straightforward, almost bullet point approach, is all the commonality between every InfoSec exam. Because every InfoSec exam is going to ask you about malware. Every InfoSec exam is going to ask you about a firewall. Now, CompTIA may be different from the rest in that it also includes port numbers, and ISACA may be different from the rest because they're going to include a lot more governance and audit heavy stuff. But there's a commonality between enough of them where if you have this single book, and it's thin, it's not a real long book, it's not real complex. If you have this commonality, at least you have a foundation, a backbone to structure the rest of your studies around. And if you know that material in that book, I would say you're anywhere from 60 to 70% on your way to completing your studies. So that's why that book exists. And I'm kind of disappointed in the 10 years or so that it's existed. It has not been one of my better sellers. And it's the one that's the cheapest. It's the one that's the easiest to read. It's the one that has the most content and the direct language of speaking to the reader. That one's kind of the Rosetta Stone. So I would kind of like to see that one pick up more in interest, because I think it could help a lot of people.
Yeah, we'll definitely put the link in the description to the podcast, and hopefully
yeah,
drive
I just
a
turned
little
your
bit
show
more
into advertorial. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Drive a little bit more of that into your business. But another thing that I know you do, and you had mentioned, is I know you've built your own test prep exam question app around certain exams. And one of the things that I do, as I mentioned, as an instructor, teaching courses, is be wary of assessment exams to a degree. Yes, they're helpful to you. They're good basis of knowledge. But when I'm doing, depending on what I'm doing, I'm studying for more SACA now, and they've got a very nice Q&A engine that really goes through the exam, goes through the questions, gives you reasons why, test you, and then gives you reasons why this is the right answer, and very detailed approach. But when you're looking at some of these exam engines and things like that, a lot of times I'll take, if I'm taking an online course, say I'm taking an ISC2 on-demand course, I'll go in, before I take the test, or before I take the course, I will take this assessment and see where I score just blindly before I've looked at any of the material. And then I'm like, okay, these are areas I need to focus on. And anytime anybody is, I'm in a class and they're like, oh, what's the best exam prep engine for me to use to prep for this exam? I'm like, all right, I need to stop you right there. You need to learn the
I am
material and then you do
so
that.
glad to hear that. I am so, and it's sort of I don't know when we caused this in students. I don't know who got this idea. Maybe it was prepping for the SAT when we were in high school. Maybe
Right.
maybe it came from there. But you're absolutely right. And I want to say this loud and proud for anyone listening. My app, Want to Practice, does not mimic the content you're going to see on the exam for any of the certs that we have content for. And that is not the purpose of practice tests. And I have this as a pinned item on the subreddits for the Wanna Be a Content and the Wanna Practice app. I say, look, the practice material is good for two things. First, it's good to get you back in the mindset of sitting on your butt for 3 hours and taking an exam. If you want to take 125 questions and mimic the experience, that's great. Because a lot of us forgot how to do that since we were in high school or since we were in college. It's just not a skill that comes up in everyday life. Most of us aren't asked to answer triple-digit multiple choice tests as part of our job. So that's one good reason to do practice tests, just to get you back in that habit again. See if you can concentrate for that amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing it's good for,
it's an endurance. It's a lot of these are just about endurance, right?
It's a marathon, and it is brutal. Anyone who says that mental exercise is not as punishing as physical exercise has not taken the CISSP, right?
Oh, no doubt, no doubt.
Yeah. And then
I think I tell a story. It wasn't the CISSP exam. I started in the structured cabling, and I took a Bixby exam, and after it was their network specialty exam, and after I took that exam, it was like I took it, and it was Mother's Day week, and I could not remember my parents' address that I lived at for 5 years at the end of that exam. So yeah, it's exactly that. Like you said, your brain just turns to mush because you've got all this technical stuff just swirling around it for so long.
And it's abusive. And that feeling of exhaustion after when you go out to your car and you've got that sheet of paper and you're afraid to even open and look at it, it's draining. We've all been there for sure. So that's one of the things I hope the app helps with. And then the other thing is what practice questions should help you with is exposing you to areas that you need to work on yourself. And I'm not talking about the gotcha questions, and we all got gotcha questions. I know I've got a handful in my stuff. These are the ones that are so obscure and archaic. They're only there to teach you and convince you can't know everything. All right. You gotta get past the idea that you're going to get every single question right. All right. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the questions that are fairly straightforward and have to do with some topic or subtopic from the exam outline that you do need to know for the exam. So all this is doing, all these practice questions are doing, are exposing you to content that you do need to have knowledge about. And so your score doesn't really matter. There's plenty of different reasons why your score may not reflect your true performance. There's plenty of reasons why my exam you might score higher on than Mike Chappelle's exam, or you might score lower on mine than Thor Peterson's, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And that all has to do with flavor and approach and tonality. So don't think of your score as your readiness to sit and take the actual exam. Use your score, use the actual results, use the questions that you missed to help you train yourself and study and focus on those content areas. That's all it's about. And it's still a very, very useful tool. And I don't think I'm ripping anyone off by saying this doesn't mimic the exam. I think it still adds value to your study approach. And I think it will help you build the confidence and build those areas that you're going to need to be successful.
No, those are really good points because I mean, like you said, I get asked when I'm teaching a ISC2 course, and we go through the domain knowledge checks. How similar are these questions to the exam questions? Well, I'll tell you, the people that do the content or teach the content have nothing to do with writing the exam items, so they couldn't possibly be the same. They might be the same, similar flavor because all of us have taken that exam, so we know what the way the questions are asked. But they're definitely.
And here's the horrible thing. Here's the really horrible thing. Those questions on those exams necessarily suck, and it's almost by design. It's not to mess people up. It's not to make the questions harder. But it's because, one, they're written by committee. It's always a group effort. It's not some subject matter expert writing these questions out. Two, they have to meet certain criteria. And those criteria are so broad and so, I don't want to call them arbitrary because they're not. Those criteria are so inclusive that it makes it very hard to create good, concise questions with specificity. So instead, you end up with these rambling story problems that seem to be designed to trick you when what they're trying to do is satisfy all the criteria for their creation. And when you sit down and you take one of these exams for the first time, especially if it's an ISC squared exam, you're going to think that someone's playing a joke on you. You're going to think that this is an English test more than it is an IT or InfoSec exam. And there is an aspect to that. There definitely is a huge part to that. Be aware of that and understand that, and don't get discouraged because those questions will be clunky. They'll require you to read them 2 or 3 times before you even understand what's being asked. And it will not look like any of the practice content you've ever seen. It just, because it can't the way that it's created. And the reason I don't write practice questions that look like the IFC squared exams or CompTIA or ISACA is because no one would buy it. Everyone would demand their money back because my stuff would look so ham-fisted and amateurish that no one would believe that this is actually what you're going to see on the exam.
No, those are really good points. And yeah, like you said, I mean, the aspect of doing an assessment and yeah, I'll be the first one to say, you know, I don't ace, so to speak, any exam that I take. You know, like you know, so you pointing that out just helps me in my own imposter syndrome. But those are, you know, those are things, you know, you'll never see me posting a score that I got on an exam on LinkedIn because I generally, you know, I'm far enough away. And usually when I don't successfully get an exam, I'm usually so flipping close that it really aggravates me to my core because I know I'm like 1 or 2 questions away.
At the Air Force Academy, we had a couple of sayings for this. One was, if the minimum wasn't good enough, it wouldn't be the minimum. And the other one was, max the min. You know, there's no reason to expend the extra effort. You know, in time management, you got so much to focus on. Do just enough to pass, and then go do another thing and pass that. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, those are the points I always try to make, you know, to the students is and yeah, like you said, you know, I had a student take an exam right off of a 5-day, you know, boot camp. Took it that Monday, and he's like, none of the practice questions or anything were anything like the ones in the exam. And I told you that in the class to that they weren't going to be. So you drilling yourself all weekend on practice questions. You weren't consuming the content and consuming the actual concepts, which is what's important to passing an exam. You got to understand the concept, and like you said, those rambling questions. Anytime I'm talking to somebody about exam tips, it's you've got to find the specific areas and then be able to connect that to the domain and the domain area that they're asking that question in, because you're obviously not giving you that in an exam.
And more important, you have to ignore the misnomers and red herrings that may also be in the question text.
Yeah,
that they've included in there, particularly just to distract from the heart of what the question's asking. Yeah. And that's not easy.
No, it's not. I mean, that's a skill, right? And a skill that you get taking many exams. So yeah, buy Ben's book, and you can learn some of those tips and tricks. I've looked at some of your sample questions in your I think think there aren't any exams that I don't already or certifications I don't already have that are in your app. So I haven't purchased your app myself, but you know, it is a good approach, I think, at practicing. And like you said, use it as a practice. Questions should always be used as a tool to learn where your weaknesses are. And another thing, and you know, one of the concepts, I've done a lot of know before you sit webinars for ISC2, and one of the things that always seems to come out of that when we're talking about exam questions and preparing for an exam, and when you're sitting at that exam, is know why the wrong answers are wrong too. You know, because that means you have absorbed and comprehended the concept that they're asking you. You know, it's not just you know, okay, this one's wrong because it's just wrong, this one's wrong just because it's just wrong, but it might be one of these two. Why is it one and not the other?
Awesome. I love that. And another thing that I'd say, and this kind of harkens back to my concept of teaching the test and why that's, you know, academic kryptonite. There are so many smart people, people smarter than me, people who know more about IT and tech than I will ever know, who suck at taking multiple choice tests. And that has nothing to do with their intelligence. It has nothing to do with how they were raised or where they're from. It has everything to do with the fact that multiple choice tests are not a natural thing that occurs in global history. That's just not something that Mother Nature equipped us for equally. So some of us have this bizarre talent to be able to sit at any multiple choice test and do well. And some people might have a PhD in a topic that they still can't pass a test for. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. There's a certain innate talent there. And then there's also a way to train up that skill to help people do things like eliminate wrong answers. Read from the bottom up, the last answer instead of the first answer. And that gets rid of your order bias. And you know, there's a lot of things you can learn to maximize your approach to passing a multiple choice test. I know plenty of folks who have failed the CISSP 3, 4, 5 times before finally passing it. And that is no comment on their talent. It is no comment on their skill as a practitioner. It has everything to do with the fact that multiple choice tests are not a good way of determining your suitability as a candidate.
That's an interesting and excellent point from that. And yeah, I never thought about the order bias aspect.
I learned that from one of my students, and now I teach that exclusively. It makes the most sense, and it's beautiful, and it's cheap and free. You know, that's great.
Yeah, because you're like, oh, it's, you know, when if you're writing a question, you generally might think that the top question might be the more right, and then go from there. So those are all great tips, and definitely great information. You know, I'm sure we could talk hours on these topics and all of our lessons learned as we've been in classrooms and been you know, written content and everything like that. But I think we're gonna bring this episode to a close. But are there any last things that you want to comment on or bring to light?
Absolutely. You know, and we'll handle this more offline, but I want to offer you as an instructor, I'm going to give you a deeper discount for the Wanna Practice app to convey to your students as a thank you for the work that you do, and for having me on the show. And we'll set that up too. I want to tell everybody out there who is a candidate for a cert right now. It's daunting. It's expensive. It's time consuming. It requires a lot of your study, a lot of time away from your friends and family. You could be doing anything other than sitting and studying this junk on your weekend and your evenings. Also, there's a terrible feeling that you may fail and you may have to go through it all again. Don't let that stop you. It's worth it, if nothing else, to be able to hang your hat on the fact that you're part of a very small, elite community of folks who've been through the same torturous nonsense that you've been through. It's well worth it. And the worst thing that can happen if you fail is you got to reschedule and take it again and pay for it. But all you got to do is go take it again. Nobody's ever going to count the number of times you took it against you. No one's ever going to look at you askance because you aren't some kind of freakish superstar who can pass every test in the world. Don't let it be daunting. Go for it. go for it.
Yeah, we've talked a lot on this podcast about stepping out of your comfort zone in various different ways, whether it's public speaking or going after certification or going after a career in infosec or cloud or whatever it is. So that's sound advice and definitely a good way to look at it. Don't be afraid. I had one of my CGRC students. We instead of saying you failed an exam, we were talking around assessments, and we were talking about, in the risk management framework, there's satisfied and other than satisfied. So now so it became of when you don't pass an exam, you received an other than satisfied result.
I like that a lot. That's
fantastic.
It
was brilliant. It was brilliant.
And that's how we become good instructors. We steal from each other. I'm stealing that from you. Okay.
Very well. I stole it from one of my students. He came up with it in the class. So, and I'm using that. We used that the rest of the week, and I've used it ever since. Because I always said that not passing the exam is an opportunity to grow rather than a failure. And if you take that approach to it, then you understand. It's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to learn about the exam and about the questions on the exam, and then you'll succeed the next time. That's what I always tell everybody. Don't hold it, like you said, exactly like you said. If you don't pass the exam the first time, nobody's going to hold it against you. All of us have failed exams. Some of us have failed the same exam multiple times, but we ultimately succeed in the ultimate goal of things, and that's really what it comes down to.
So. Agreed. Absolutely.
All right. Well, this brings us to the end of this episode. So I want to thank you again, Ben, for joining me today. Please subscribe and stay up to date on upcoming episodes. Also, there'll be some links to Ben's book and to his app on the description to the podcast. So until next time, always be learning and skill up like a superhero.